Hi, Greg.
Hello, you.
This will be our February full moon video, and there's a green comet overhead, and it's up there. It hasn't been here since Stone Ages, and it
I'm
won't
gonna
be
have to
back.
get out and look for it.
It won't be back for another 5 billion years. So
Huh. Can you see it with your naked eye, or
I don't know,
yeah,
but
you haven't gone out to
that's
look?
all they've been talking about all week is the green comet shooting past the planet.
Okay.
It's
Well,
supposed to be shooting by Mars, wherever Mars is.
okay.
They said you can see it with binoculars, I think.
Hmm. Well, I'm interested in what all you got to say today because you want to talk about Scientology and how L. Ron Hubbard came to your school and about John Travolta and Epstein and how it all goes together and about Attorney General Barr. That's a lot of things to connect. So let's hear what all you got to say about it.
Well, when I was born in Oakland County, Michigan, and Roseanne Barr lived in my neighborhood with Kathy O'Brien, I mean, not Orion, O'Brien. And Dr. O'Brien was a friend of mine. He was a pretty nice guy. Uh, he never drank, he didn't do drugs. And when I was poisoning my coffee as a older guy in my 20s, a lot of my neighbors would poison my coffee and my food because they stole a lot of money from me. Um,
Hmm.
I would end up in jail and they'd tell me I was drunk driving when my food was poisoned. You never know when somebody's going to poison your food in a restaurant. You jump in your car and all of a sudden you pass out. So
Hmm.
I ended up in jail for drunk driving. And back then they didn't have drunk driving tests. So they never took me to a hospital. They just kept throwing me in a jail cell telling me I was drunk driving when people handed me Mickey's in my food. And so I ended up being Dr. O'Brien's sponsor, and he had quit drinking. And when I first met him, he was in Rochester Hospital in Michigan. But going back years earlier, Roseanne Barr, her and the people that kidnapped and raped me when Admiral Byrd died, Osborne and Daryl Hall and Andrew and Anderson and Wallace and Long and Schultz, these people from my public school system, they hid me on Senator Graham's Channel 4 News, Graham Media, uh, Peter
CEO is
Graham,
Barr.
Peter Graham, Billy Graham, and the whole Graham family. Yeah, Roseanne Barr was working for Graham on TV and on WWJ with Osborne, the very family where they chained me to a chair and tortured me and raped me and beat my twin to death. Um, I was 4 years old. That was in 1957. And Roseanne Barr grew up working for Graham on Channel 4 and WWJ radio. And she told the world that Hollywood was using her for sex. And it was a complete lie to hide my kidnap. And it's interesting. At 13, I met L. Ron Hubbard at my high school. I was put in high school early. I was 13, possibly 14. I met L. Ron Hubbard at my high school as they made me a teacher. I taught science and electronics. So I was like ahead of my time after they flunked me in 3 grades in elementary school as a principal, and my teachers handed me over to Osborne and Hall and Andrews and Anderson to rape me and torture me. And they were doing this in Osborne's basement on Hoover Street, and J. Edgar Hoover was head of the FBI, and you had the Hoover Dam, and Hubert Hoover was president, and they really marked me like there's no tomorrow as they tortured and raped me at the age of 4. So I get into high school in that same public school system, and there's L. Ron Hubbard trying to recruit me into Scientology. And John Travolta didn't exist yet. And they made me a teacher, and one of my girlfriends was Mary Pat Cotter. When they made me a teacher, L. Ron Hubbard showed up, and then the following year, the world got Welcome Back Cotter as I dated
TV
Mary Pat
series.
Cotter. Yeah, as I dated Mary Pat Cotter. And that was Epstein and Travolta.
Epstein was a character on the show, right?
Yeah, he joined Scientology. I told L. Ron Hubbard he was a cult, and I said, no, thank you, because I was going
Mm-hmm.
to a Catholic school learning Latin and the Bible in a couple different languages. And my mother wanted me to be a priest. And I talked to Mr. Hubbard for a while, and he didn't know the Bible. So I didn't want to be in his church. And it didn't seem to me that the Bible was science. The Bible uh, really had nothing to do with what I was teaching, electronics and science. Um, so I just told him he was a cult, and I never joined Scientology. And then the world got John Travolta. And a lot of John Travolta's movies marked my life. I don't know if John Travolta knows that or not. Uh, he joined Scientology along with other people like the Presley family. And my family was
Mm-hmm.
writing the songs that Elvis Presley sang in his movies and in Vegas.
Well, weren't you friends with Lisa Presley, the one that just died?
No, her mother, I knew her mother.
You knew her mother. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And then Elvis Presley's publisher was I used to go to dinner with her in New York. B.B. Bourne inherited the Bourne Publishing Company from her father when her father died. And I go to New York and I have dinner with the Mills brothers, Stanley Mills and B.B. Bourne and Dee Snider before he was Twisted Sister.
Mm-hmm.
And Dee Snider, I mean, he sat and had dinner with me and talked to me, and with Bourne and Mills and Morton Gould, and he was a friend of mine on Facebook. I asked him to help me tell my truth on 9/11, and he told me, "Well, you'll have to pay me." Uh, so he wanted to be paid to say my truth on 9/11. So I unfriended him and didn't talk to him anymore. I think that's kind of cheesy to tell the truth. He needed to be paid.
Yeah, especially about something so important.
Yeah, when 6,000 people were killed, and then they went and murdered all those Muslims who were innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And he could have told the truth, but he wanted money, and he gave me a big sum of money he wanted, and my publishing company was stolen, and he knows that. He's just counting on me having more money, and he didn't want to tell the truth about 9/11 unless he was paid. And then he took on the radio, he took Alice Cooper's place when Alice Cooper semi-retired. And Alice Cooper, I lived down the street from him in East Detroit, and my wife, her father was mayor of East Detroit. So all these people knew me and knew my wife, Nancy Fredericks, and Ted Nugent and the Ramones and the B-52s and Alice Cooper. They knew who I was.
So now back to where we started. What was the connection between Barr and hiring Epstein and that? I think you were going to talk about that some.
Yeah, well, as I was made a teacher at 13 or 14, I taught science and electronics in Warren Consolidated as L. Ron Hubbard tried to recruit me. And he tried to recruit me. He came to Warren High because that's where Mitch Ryder was. And my older brother
Yeah,
had
he wants
married.
celebrities. Yeah.
Yeah, my older brother had married Mitch Ryder's bass player, and they were writing songs like "Good Golly Miss Molly" and "Devil with a Blue Dress On," and Elvis was singing those songs in Vegas and in his movies. So, um, that's why L. Ron Hubbard came to Warren High and Warren Consolidated. And then my school was funded by Mr. Webster. Webster funded Warren Consolidated. And when DuPont and Milky the Clown, Claire Cummins, and 2,500 American corporations stole my federal publishing license, Webster put my trademark in his dictionary the following year. It wasn't in the dictionary, and a word in the dictionary back then couldn't be a trademark. So I had been playing drums for Del Towers at Warren Consolidated in his chorus. Warren High had a choir, and they would go around Michigan and perform. And we were performing at a private party on Telegraph Road. And when the party was over and I was done playing drums for Mr. Towers and the choir, I walked across the street in front of Dire Straits' house on Telegraph Road. I believe his name was Mark Knopfler. And I hired Weiner and Associates to protect my trademark bottom line. And I paid him money. And I walked back across the street, got on the bus, and went back to Warren High. But Weiner and Associates, he moved to New York. And the next thing I know, they were using my bottom line trademark in New York, and they had made it a study book in California for lawyers to pass the bar exam. And then you got a Bottom Line magazine, and then they built a Bottom Line club in a whole bunch of countries. So Weiner didn't protect my trademark. And he had
Sounds like he sold it.
Yeah, he had married Aberdeen. And then all the rock and roll artists in New York, Brooklyn, Manhattan, they all got their start in my stolen trademark bottom line. People like Epstein and not Epstein, Bruce Springsteen and Cohen. They all played at the bottom line, my stolen trademark. And then the WWF had bottom line events. And this was my federal publishing license and my trademark back when they killed the Kennedy family. And my band Bottom Line, we had played at Warren High and won the Battle of the Bands there. And we played at Central University and Michigan State and won the Battle of the Bands in those colleges. And I grew up playing on Michigan State's football field in the marching band at Warren High. And then my band, we played in the biggest clubs all over Detroit and Chicago. And I even played up in Toronto and down in Florida. And I was being played on the radio, music we wrote. And that's why L. Ron Hubbard came and tried to recruit me. He was a cult, and I think everybody knows Scientology is a cult by now. And I really bought in and believed in God and Jesus. I didn't want to join a cult interested in just making money and people's stars in Hollywood. I didn't think that was right. And now looking at the damage they caused in this country, I'm sure everybody knows Scientology is a cult. Not much different not much different than Jim Jones. And then back when I was playing at the Ryan Roadhouse, Jim Jones, he murdered Congressman Ryan there in South Africa. And the Ryan family were my friends on an Indian reservation. Mr. Ryan was a Chippewa Indian I knew. After I escaped the people that were kidnapping and torturing me and murdering kids in Oakland County, an Indian chief put me on a reservation, and I met Mr. Ryan and other Indians. And Mr. Ryan was Lakota Indian from the Dakotas, and his tribe owned Mount Rushmore. And I'm related to all the presidents on Mount Rushmore and all the presidents on the United States money.
Yeah.
And I'm not bragging about that. It's been a curse. On
Yeah.
the day they murdered my family member Admiral Byrd, I was kidnapped and they beat my twin to death, and my public school system did that. Now at the same time, I was made a teacher in Warren, and L. Ron Hubbard came to me, and then L. Ron Hubbard went to Manhattan and Brooklyn and recruited John Travolta and gave the world welcome back Cotter as I dated Mary Pat Cotter in Warren, Consolidated, Michigan. Mary Pat Cotter was my friend, and then the world got welcome back Cotter with John Travolta. He was Bob.
I get it.
Yeah, and with Epstein.
But you were a teacher, and then Barr hired Epstein to be a teacher?
Yeah, and at Dalton School, and Dalton worked for me at my business. And at Dalton School in Manhattan, the Attorney General's father, Mr. Barr, gave Epstein a job as a teacher teaching math. And then if you know my life, Fuller was my family. And my grandmother, Mrs. Fuller, related to Bucky Fuller, she was murdered leaving church with more than half of her family. They murdered her son, Harold, and her daughters ran them over leaving church. My mother was in that same car on Clinton River Road, and my mother was thrown from the car, so when it exploded and caught on fire, she didn't die. And then in the days and weeks that followed, the Fuller family that they didn't run over, they went back and ran them over in their driveways in New Haven, Michigan. People like my Aunt Harris and Lucille, they went back and ran their kids over with semis in their driveways while they rode their bikes or sat on a driveway and played hopscotch, whatever. So they murdered the whole Fuller family, and they did this for money. And this was before I was born. It's when my mother was 7. And all the events in my life center around the government murdering my family. And they murdered my family for money. The Fuller family owned the bus patents, the milk truck patents, the Chevy van patents. We built the Fuller transmission for all the semis in Battle Creek, Michigan. And my Aunt Gardner would go and pick up Mac up in Battle Creek, take them out for dinner. And this was all about the Fuller transmission and the patents that were stolen.
Well, then that makes sense why Clinton was involved with Epstein and with the whiners.
Prince Andrew. Andrew and Anderson were 2 of the people that would kidnap me and torture me with Osborne and Darrell Hall and Wallace and Long. And Long was Huey P. Long, and Wallace was Governor Wallace. Osborne was governor of Michigan. Andrews was Prince Andrews, I would assume. And then you had the Anderson family, and it's real interesting that Ozzy Osbourne, the family that would kidnap me and chain me to a toilet and torture me on Hoover Street, and Hoover was the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, and Hubert Humphrey was president, and then you had the Hoover Dam, and I wasn't on that street for no reason. And then Hughes Street, my family owned Hughes Street, and Baker College was built on Hughes Street after they built Hazel Park High School on Hughes Street in the year that Kennedy was murdered. And I've never told you before, Greg, but my family was with Lincoln as his guest in Ford Theater. And just before Kennedy died, the year before Kennedy died on Hoover Street, when I was about 9 years old, they put out a flyer all over Hoover Street, the Osborne family, with similarities between Kennedy and Lincoln. And they listed them in a flyer, like I have notes here. And it was typewritten, and they ran it off on a mimeograph machine and passed it out in Oakland County, Michigan. How they both had the same amount of letters in their name. They both were married to similar people, and on and on and on. They had a list of things Lincoln and Kennedy had in common.
And that still gets circulated around the internet today all the time. But you were seeing it before he was even killed.
Before he was murdered. And my family was with Lincoln as he was murdered.
Right.
And then Osborne and Hall, Darrell Hall, and Anderson and Andrews and Long and Wallace and Schultz, even Mrs. Schultz, handed me over to the male gay pedophiles who would torture and rape me in Oakland County, Michigan. And L. Brooks Patterson would be sitting outside of Osborne's home. And he saw me run out of Osborne's home completely naked, crawl out of a basement window, and he never made out a police report. L. Brooks Patterson. And we made videos about him.
Yeah.
He was no good. And he got $20 million a year to solve Oakland County child murders, never solved a single murder. And then when Ford, who is my family, his real name is Gardner and King, not Ford. When he took over the presidency behind Nixon and Spiro Agnew, they murdered Timmy King and threw Timmy King on my family's property. And L. Brooks Patterson knew all of this was evolving around the Fuller family and the Harris family in my life, and that I was kidnapped and little kids were being murdered. And he knew this all the way back in the 57. Him and other policemen in Hazel Park and Oakland County. And they covered all this.
I'm seeing all over the place, even around here. I'm seeing the police involved with kidnapping girls and so on. A recent event around here, the same thing.
They do it all the time, and the police make the porno movies. I had the sheriff from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where Baker and Jim Mars lived. Judith Baker, Albuquerque, the sheriff's wife, came and lived with me and my wife when Victoria was still alive. And she was a porno star in Albuquerque. Her sheriff husband of Albuquerque turned her into a porno star. And she came and lived with I and Vicky, and she was a lesbian. And eventually, when I learned all these things about her, I had her leave my home.
Yeah.
And then Vicky was dead the following year. And these things aren't coincidence, because I'm also the Baker family. I'm the Gardner family, the Baker family, and a whole lot of other families on your money, the money you use. Like I grew up with Mr. Chase and the Chase family. I grew up with Grant. I grew up with all the people on the money. Lincoln. I went to school with Lincoln. Hamilton. I bought my first car from Mr. Hamilton Chevrolet. These people are my cousins.
Yeah.
And they made the country back in 1700s from the original colony in Boston. And there's no lie in this. I'm those families.
Yeah.
And so L. Ron Hubbard tried to recruit me before he recruited John Travolta and the other actors he recruited. And I told him, no, you're a cult. And I told him this 3 times.
There's not very many people can say that, so that's pretty cool.
And then he gave up and went to New York and recruited John Travolta.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bill Barr, the attorney general, his father gave Epstein a job as a teacher at the same time I was made a teacher in Warren, Michigan. And then you got the Warren report when they murdered Kennedy. It's not coincidence. My alumni in Warren Consolidated was Garrison. And then Manning sold me a Civil War farm where they murdered two of my wives. Actually, they murdered three of my wives. Kiki was murdered as I moved on to that ranch. But she didn't live in Tennessee. She lived in Michigan, where I had left her. So Bill Barr gave Epstein a job as a math teacher as I became a science and electronics teacher, and Buckminster Fuller was the smartest mathematician in America. That's my family.
Mm-hmm.
They stole my patents and my trademark for Bottom Line. They made it Bottom Line Events at the WWF, which was another stolen trademark. And Hulk Hogan and his brother Michael were down here in Utica, Michigan. He even wrote a book and said I was lying when I said his brother Michael was my bouncer at Covey's, and it was truth.
Yeah.
And then he went back and he earned all his money in Bottom Line Events. And then
Yeah, it makes sense.
if you see the media pictures of Hulk Hogan, usually he's behind a sign that says Hoff, H off, and I'm Hugh. And then
Mm-hmm.
my family member Hoffa disappeared all
Mm-hmm.
around the same time Hulk Hogan wrote his book. And then Randy Savage said the Twin Towers are going to come tumbling down as I played with D Savage.
Yeah, yeah, Savage and Hogan
Listen,
together. Yeah,
I was playing with D Savage at Club Chevelle.
yeah.
And then I'm more marked than anybody on the face of this earth. Everybody denies I exist because 2,500 American corporations stole my trademark, and everybody earned their money at my stolen trademark, including Aberdeen and Snedowski and Alan Pepper. And Alan had been screwing my wife. A detective in Michigan who was supposed to protect me was screwing my wife as they stole my trademark.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't even been married to Nancy Fredericks for a week. I walked in and he had her laying on the floor having sex with her in front of my newborn daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And this was no small thing. Her father was mayor of East Detroit, and then her next stepfather was Joe Jacobs of IBM. And he gave Gates the software to make his first computer at our wedding. And these aren't small things. And the Gates family are also my cousins.
Oh yeah, I see their heritage right here in our town, in the cemetery right down the street with some of the original founders, and more of them up with Putnam
And
and the
then
other
think I was
founders.
made a teacher at 13, teaching electronics. I just got a package here. Could you open the door and get the package? I'm sorry to interrupt the video. I had a couple computers stolen recently, and one of them was yours with my book on it. So I bought a computer to replace them. And it just arrived. And it's interesting. Yeah, thank you. Please lock that door.
Yeah, I was amazed how they stole the computer, stole my thumb drive right after some Yahoo puts his
Oh, that
name
would have
as
been Bill Barr and
my
Trump.
last name, and oh yeah,
That would have been Bill
they put
Barr
their
and Trump. Bill Barr and
yeah.
Trump stole the computer. He was
But
president.
they sent us a message. They put my last name and it said ends as and then send us a little signal on Facebook right as they stole it, right as they were saying that they thought the book was about done.
Well, let's get back on subject.
Yeah.
Roseanne Barr hid me with Graham, Trump's buddy. If you notice, Trump just kicked off his 2024 campaign with Senator Graham from South Carolina. And a state policeman was watching over my wives as they were murdered the second time, Terry and Victoria, in hospitals in Johnson City, Tennessee. And these were state policemen that came from South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And they were right in my wife's room as my wife was dismembered, sodomized, and murdered. So state policemen from Senator Graham's state helped murder my wives. And this is not something
Yeah.
I think. I know these things. And as my wives were dismembered, the Walters family, which was my wife's advocate in Johnson City Hospital, had called me on the phone and screamed Slater and Slatery on the phone as they cut my wife's ears off and took my wife's ears. And I had to bury her minus her ears. And the police in that town, they never filed murder reports. And I had an attorney who was murdered on the same day, Halloween Eve. Mm-hmm. And I noticed you mentioned in the book you just wrote about me, about famous people murdered on Halloween Eve who are related to me. And these things aren't coincidence. It goes all the way back to when the country was founded, when George Washington gave my family his sword in the First Masons Lodge. And
yeah, even before that, yeah.
These governors and people who run TV and senators, they stole my whole life. They stole my patents. They stole my trademarks. A guy who ran the CIA from Great Lakes, I'm not going to mention his name, he and I went to high school together. In fact, my first two band members and the guy that lived down the street from me, they all became CIA. And then my best friend at Warren High ran the CIA from Great Lakes Naval Base.
And his relatives were right here in the cemetery too, with Putnam.
Yeah, yeah. My first band, bottom line, they became CIA when I replaced them. And this is all the way back in the 60s. So everybody in my neighborhood became CIA as CIA lied to everybody about who killed Kennedy. And I'm the Baker family. They built Baker College on a street my family owned. Flayton, one of my other uncles, he was introduced to me as uncle with Brooks. Bob Hope took Brooks to entertain the troops in Vietnam. I gave custody of my kids to Bobby Brooks the last time I stopped illegal gun and drug trade on property I bought from Mazar, Trump's tax attorney. And Bill Barr's father gave Epstein a job at Dalton School in Manhattan as I became a teacher and Roseanne Barr and Kathy O'Brien were hiding me with Senator Graham. Back then it was Billy Graham, and you had Jim Baker and Tammy Faye Baker. When my daughter was born, my wife named her Tammy, and then the world got Tammy Faye Baker. And they had just built Baker College on a street my family owned. And they built.
Then Graham married.
They closed down Fitzgerald High School when they passed out the flyer about Kennedy and Lincoln and all the similarities on Hoover Street before they murdered Kennedy. They closed down Fitzgerald High School and built Hazel Park High School on my property, Hughes Street. These aren't coincidences. And I even know the civil servant who named the streets. The Continental Divide is Johnson. That's not coincidence. They planned John F. Kennedy's murder in a college before he was even president.
Yeah,
and when he ran the second time, they murdered him. And one of the Kennedys with Frank Sinatra and Morton Gould made me a publisher in Foley Federal Court. Then they beheaded Foley after 9/11. I had a civil rights case against the family that built the Pentagon because I had 50 attorneys I had already paid for at my business bottom line, and they wouldn't allow, L. Brooks Patterson wouldn't allow me to call my own attorney when they had arrested me. And then they arrested me because I was driving a semi from Ohio to Michigan, delivering refinery products. And I took a sandwich out of one of the gas stations I worked for. So they arrested me. And then he wouldn't allow me to call my attorneys. Webb, and now you have the Webb telescope. It's not coincidence. And I was working with Tina Turner's ex-husband, Ike Turner, White Boy Rick. These people repaired and fed me in Whitmore Lake, Michigan. And then I was with Burn Security up in Ohio delivering on a truck, and Webb didn't give me a paycheck for 2 months. I was starving to death driving a semi delivering refinery products. So I took a sandwich. I walked into one of the places I delivered to, took a sandwich. L. Brooks Patterson arrested me. And without a gun or a knife or a weapon, they charged me with a felony. And then they wouldn't allow me to call my own attorneys. And I had corporate attorneys, 50 of them. And you know this, you've seen my lawyer's letters. At the same time, they were stealing my trademark with Bottom Line Events. The IRS employees wouldn't give me proper paperwork to file worldwide taxes. My federal license was in every country on earth, 44 countries at that time. And I own 28,000 worldwide entertainment contracts, and I own contracts with Fox Entertainment. And this is all before Fox News even existed, or Fox Entertainment. And all of this was based in Manhattan, where Bill Barr's father made Epstein a teacher in Dalton School as Dalton worked for me in Warren, Michigan. And Roseanne Barr and Kathy O'Brien and Graham and Osborne hid me on Channel 4 and WWJ, the two biggest media stations in Michigan, Detroit. I stopped Hank from selling drugs, and now you have Senator Graham with Help Me Hank on WWJ for the last 10, 12 years. So if I want to be on WWJ in Detroit and tell my truth about who really killed Hoffa and Kennedy, I have to go to Help Me Hank. And he's the drug dealer, Hank Bouguet. He was using a fictitious name, renting a home behind my house on the property I bought in Utica, Michigan. He was running a CIA gun and drug trade. He was a real, what do you call him, druggist. He had a pharmaceutical license. And nurses were writing phony prescriptions on nurses' pads, and he would cash them all where he was a druggist. And then he was selling LSD and cocaine, amphetamines in a worker house behind the farm I bought from Mazar. Instantly, Graham puts Help Me Hank on his TV news station. And Hank Bouguet was CIA front for the illegal Senate gun and drug trade with Bucky Larson. And then they framed White Boy Rick. White Boy Rick was about 14, 15 years old when he met me. And I took a job driving truck for Webb when I moved from Utica, Michigan after I got out of jail. They put me in jail for a year because I stopped an illegal Senate gun and drug trade. You got this picture, Greg?
Oh, yeah. And I've been thinking of ways how they hid that in Hollywood.
I don't smoke, I don't drink, and I don't do drugs. And they put me in jail because I stopped an illegal drug trade that I didn't know was attached to a gun trade, giving Mexican cartels guns in return for money and drugs. And the Senate was behind it with the CIA. And all of my band members and my best friend in high school all became CIA agents and ran the CIA. And then when you put this together with I was kidnapped on the very day Admiral Byrd was murdered, the Navy funded and ran the CIA. Oh, gee, and you think maybe an admiral had something to do with that, Greg?
Yeah.
And this is the kind of cover-ups in my life. So as Roseanne Barr hid me with Senator Graham's family on WWJ radio, the biggest radio station in Michigan,
Yeah.
and
Barr still
Channel
runs it.
4 Detroit, as they hid my torture and rape with L. Brooks Patterson in the murders of my own twin and kids in Oakland County. The Attorney General was appointed by Donald Trump. Gee,
Barr.
I wonder
Hmm.
why. You think maybe it was because they screamed the Attorney General's name over the phone as they dismembered my wives in Johnson City, Tennessee?
Hmm. Hmm.
Are you understanding this?
Yeah, and I think
And then he
there may
went
be some
back to the
connection.
White House, and then he went back to the White House, and he did an interview on the White House lawn, and he said, bottom line. So it looked like he was trying to help
Hmm.
me after 3 of my wives were murdered. And then he let the
Hmm.
Bundys out of jail, and my fourth wife was murdered on the day he let them out of jail. And the Barr family has hidden me since I was 4 on the day they murdered my family member, Admiral Byrd, in all media.
Hmm.
Roseanne Barr told the whole world a fake story about her being used by Hollywood as she got a job working for Graham Media in Detroit. And Trump put Barr into that position as Attorney General, knowing that I had to go to the Attorney General to seek justice for my 3 murdered wives at that time. And then you had Triple H, which who marked all 3 of my murdered wives. My wives were murdered on Christmas Day, July 4th, and Halloween Eve, holidays.
Hmm.
And the world got Triple H at Bottom Line Events, my stolen trademark. Donald Trump gave the world Barr, as the entire lawyers bar had already been using my stolen trademark to pass the bar exam for 50 years. And then he said my stolen trademark in a speech, bottom line, on the White House lawn as he appointed Bill Barr, who he knew would hide me.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And
And
Jack Ruby's girlfriend was Barr
all
also.
of this was done as de Blasio, a Russian man, took my bass player's name, a decorated soldier from Vietnam who replaced my little brother who helped DuPont and Milky the Clown, and Osborne steal my trademark
Hmm.
worldwide, not knowing I had a federal license and was paying taxes via the IRS in every country on earth. I was about to publish my own band, and they all replaced me with a friend of Osborne, spreading kiddie porn in his airplane.
Hmm.
And this was all a setup because nobody knew I was kidnapped at 4 because L. Brooks Patterson never made out a police report. There was no news. Roseanne Barr was busy with Kathy O'Brien hiding it with Senator Graham's family. Jackie was busy marrying honest sis as they raped me, men. And Onassis was Jackie's boyfriend before she knew Kennedy. That was her childhood boyfriend, Greg.
Hmm.
So here we have Epstein, and gee, who do you think murdered Epstein? You think Trump had interest in doing that as he appointed Barr and used my stolen trademark on the front of the White House lawn?
Yep, that that's what I
I
said right when it
definitely,
happened.
I definitely know that's what went down.
Hmm. Definitely.
And nowadays, Trump tells you he's just like Al Capone. Oh, well, Al Capone murdered people too.
Right. Well,
And
did you think there was any connection there between Jack Ruby's one of his stripper girlfriends was Candy Barr also?
well, at the
And she
same
spelled it with
time,
two R's.
I worked at Ted's restaurant. You got Whoopi Goldberg and you got Ted Danson as I worked at Ted's on Telegraph Road in Pontiac and Detroit. There was 2 restaurants. I was a short order cook. Prior to that, I was a short order cook in Jimmy the Greek restaurant, a little restaurant called Tessoff's. And Candy Barr was my waitress. And then shortly after that, I rented a factory from the Carousel, which is Jack Ruby's trademark. And Dalton was working for me as Mr. Barr appointed Epstein to be a teacher in Dalton School, where he was raping little children and probably selling them for sex to people like Clinton and Prince Andrew. And remember, Andrew raped me. And these people were gays. And then you got Ozzy Osbourne. He married Sharon Collins, and Sharon Collins was my first girlfriend in elementary school. She came from
Not
London.
That Sharon Collins, but same name.
A blonde-haired Sharon Collins that was born in London.
Right.
And then one of my rapists married Sharon Collins. Anderson married Sharon Collins.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And then Sharon died of cancer when she was about 30 years old. She asked me to marry her a second time after she divorced Anderson, whom she told me was a drug dealer, and I had just stopped that drug trade. She divorced him, and then she died of cancer the following year after asking me to marry her a second time. And I was already living with Victoria on Durham Street. And get this, Bill Barr gave you Mr. Durham to look into Russia and Trump. As I rented a home on Durham Street next door to Nagy, and Nagy made the cover for Fletcher Nebel, who was John F. Kennedy's press secretary, as he was murdered.
On his book that he called Bottom Line. Yeah.
His last book was My Stolen Trademark, Bottom Line, and my next door neighbor made the cover for him. John F.
That's
Kennedy,
amazing.
press secretary in the White House. But I don't exist and I'm not newsworthy, Greg.
Right.
And then the FBI detained me for Hoffa. Tim McVeigh and Nichols were my next door neighbors. They would come to my farm and buy drugs from Hank, who has now helped me, Hank, on Graham's Channel 4 News.
That Barr runs, CEO
And
Barr.
then they made
Barr.
Bucky Larson, the other drug dealer, who was going to shoot me. They made him Born to be a Star in Hollywood.
And and they did it again.
Yeah.
They did it again. They made the Avengers.
They'll do it after I'm dead.
Yeah, but check this out. On the Avengers, they made Bucky Larson have a star on her shirt. The actress Brie Larson, and she had a star on her shirt. And then Bucky was Captain America, who's had a star shield, was his friend.
Yeah, and get this, Greg. Greg, get this. Brie is the name of the sheriff's wife. That was her nickname, Brie.
Oh wow! So that's why you had Brie Larson.
Who was making porno movies for the sheriff in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Man, gosh,
that really was her name. That was
every
her name.
Detail.
Brie.
Wow.
And then the police put me in jail for a year. And they even raped me in jail. They put me in jail cells with 30 gay guys and raped me in jail. Because I stopped the gun and drug trade on my farm. Hank was running, Help Me Hank. And Bucky Larson with Danielson and Brooks and Blanchard. They all turned a blind eye to this guy selling illegal drugs for the Senate. Blanchard was governor of Michigan back then. Marcita Blanchard would watch my kids for me. I left my kids. When I went to jail, I made Jesse and Bobby Brooks guardian of my kids. And my history teacher, Cosmo Plotz, raised Bobby Brooks, who was my aunt's daughter. She was my own cousin. I left her as guardian with Jesse, and the world was singing, I wish I had Jesse's girl. And Jay Giles' family put me on that farm I was living on, where I stopped the gun and drugs. Mr. Giles did that.
Yeah.
And it's just unbelievable. When I come home out of jail after 7 months, I got out because of good behavior. I behaved myself. I didn't have to stay a year. I got out in 7 months. I walked into my home, and there's Jesse and other dealers bagging LSD and cocaine on my kitchen table, and the kids were in my living room, right off the where they were doing it. They were getting paid $15 an hour to bag baggies of cocaine and LSD in my kitchen. After I stopped the gun and drug trade, and the police put me in jail.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then shortly after that, I stopped it again. Then Bucky Larson tried to shoot me, and my cousin Brooks stopped him because
Mm-hmm.
I interrupted his drug trade. And this is the same drugs that Mick Jagger and all the Detroit musicians were selling for the CIA and the Senate. They handed it to me. They were gonna sell it at my performances next, and I told them no. There was kids.
Right.
There was 3 and 4-year-old kids. There was a 2-year-old kid overdosed on LSD in my driveway. They got the LSD and cocaine off a Good Humor truck. That's how they sold the LSD in Utica, Michigan, and all over the Tri-County area in Good Humor trucks. And then,
That's an ice cream truck, right?
yeah, and then, I grew up with the guy that owns Good Humor. He lived behind my father's house, the house I bought for my mother and father in Sterling Heights.
Mm-hmm.
He lived in Sano Court.
So it makes sense that Mick Jagger would marry Hall, and
And he
Hall was
lived
one of
next
the
door to Hunt,
rapists.
and Hunt told you he killed Kennedy. And all of this is a big lie. The
Yeah.
FBI detained me for Hoffa's murder because the Westhouse family introduced me to Whitey a month before Hoffa disappeared, and I bought a car from Whitey. So the FBI detained me after the Westhouse family tried to murder me and introduced me to Whitey. You got this picture? But I'm not
Yeah.
newsworthy, and I don't know what I'm talking about.
And so then they did O'Brien instead of arrested O'Brien instead of they really arrested you first, but then they said they arrested O'Brien first, Chucky O'Brien.
O'Brien was my family member, and his father was my friend.
Mm-hmm. And that O'Brien was related to the O'Brien that you knew that we were talking about before, right?
Yeah, James Hoffa raised Chucky O'Brien. It wasn't his
And
real
that's
son.
yeah, Kathy O'Brien's relative that was with Roseanne.
Right, on Graham Media. And
Yeah.
then Trump uh, gave you Bill Barr, knowing that Bill Barr's father gave Epstein a job so he could traffic kids. And who'd they traffic them to? Prince Andrew,
Mm-hmm.
Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't tell me Obama didn't know about this.
Oh, I'm sure.
And they've been doing this since the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
How many famous people like Graham knew Epstein and hired kids for sex from him?
Yeah.
Graham covered it up with Trump and Barr. And then, on my street, after I was raped, my mother put me in the Webelos, and that's in your book too. My dead mother was Mrs. D. Wise, and that's where I worked for Webb, was in Dundee, Michigan. And Tina Turner's husband, Ike Turner, was my mechanic. No lie in this. And then you had Howard, who's crying over Marie Presley right now. In Happy Days, Howard drove one of the trucks. He owned a trucking company, and Ike Turner was his mechanic also. And there you have Howard from Happy Days who owns a truck company in Ohio, Greg, and he was married to the woman that owns the biggest nightclub in Ohio. On his knees, drunk every day, crying because his wife divorced him because she caught him with an underage girl. And this was in Michigan. As Trump
Which makes
appointed,
sense why, yeah.
as Trump
And Trump married.
appointed the son of the guy who gave Epstein a job to traffic children.
Right.
And
And this makes sense why Trump.
Roseanne Barr was hiding me with her best friend Graham. And then Trump's
Yeah.
base say that Donald Trump is trying to help little kids who are trafficked. Bullshit.
No. Heck, he
This
married.
is
That's what I
how
was trying to
stupid
say.
his entire base is.
He married Melania, and your wife was Milan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and she's way
And
younger than him.
he borrowed $5 billion from my family's banks and never paid a penny back. I'm well aware of all of this, Greg. The guy's a
Right.
criminal.
And that's why they visited Oakland County on the anniversary of Victoria's death.
And then he's telling the world that he's just like Al Capone. Well, gee, my father's family, who has nothing to do with my mother's family, she married him. He was a drunk. His family knew Al Capone, and I went to school with Al Capone's kids. All his relatives went to school with me. The FBI renamed Al Capone's family the Rutledge family, and they all went to school with me in Michigan, in Warren Consolidated.
Mm-hmm.
And now Trump likens himself to Al Capone after saying he's greater than Lincoln and Washington and we need to shred the Constitution. This guy's a lunatic. And he spent his life trafficking little kids with the Barr family. The very the very people in the FBI. Osborne runs the sex crime division. Barr put Epstein in Dalton School to traffic kids. Trump made Barr the attorney general. These people have hidden me in the murder of my twin on the day of Admiral Byrd's murder for 70 years now, Greg.
It's pretty obvious that they're all the same team.
I'm 70 years old now. His best friend, the Barr family. And I wouldn't say these things if they weren't true.
Yeah, and once we see the con like this, it's impossible to vote for either side now.
And I have you put these videos up on YouTube. And all of this is truth, but nobody ever takes me to court, do they?
No.
Rupert Murdoch in England on Huey Square Avenue, he copyrights my videos, doesn't he?
Yeah, he tries to claim that your videos that you're making just like you're doing now
are his videos.
Yeah, you're making those videos just like this one.
He never puts me on the news. And then he's marked me all my life with people like PeeD0 and Gene Simmons, a bunch of gay people on Fox News, after my family created cable that allowed him to make Fox News.
And you knew Harry Fox.
And then here's real good. My grandmother in the Weeblos, Mrs. DeWise, she took me over to Mrs. Barr's house back when Roseanne was telling you Hollywood was using her for sex, which is a complete BS story. If Hollywood was using her for sex, that means Senator Graham was using her. The Graham family was using Roseanne Barr for sex. Now, I've never heard that from Roseanne. And then she married a guy that looks just like my family, Clarence Rose. And I can't remember his name, but he always played criminals in the movies he was in after they divorced. And that family, Clarence Rose, his entire family was in my house as Osborne kidnapped me and murdered my twin. And then his own family killed him, growing marijuana in his cornfield. They threw him off the farm when he bitched at him about it for the third time. And then he died loading grain on trucks of a heart attack when he was about 50. They murdered their own father so they could grow marijuana in a cornfield on the biggest farm in New Haven. right around the corner from where they really buried Jimmy Hoffa.
Mr. Rose, you were
And the
talking about?
and the people that buried Jimmy Hoffa all dealt marijuana and drugs, cocaine. And I kept asking them not to deal marijuana in my home, and they never stopped. They just started trying to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
And then that family murdered my next 4 wives with presidents and hitmen. And I don't think these
Yeah.
things. I know these things. I've lived it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then because they hired bikers and police to murder my wives, they even got the Walters family to murder my wife in the hospital. Her advocate handed the killer her phone, and he screamed slatery into my ear 100 miles away over the advocate's phone from my wife's bedroom in the hospital as he cut her ear off. You understand this, Greg?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And all of
Mm-hmm.
this was done when Clinton and Obama were in the White House with Joe Biden. And now Biden's president again. You think any of them are going to help me? Now you know why I'm never in the news.
Right.
They run the media. And they raped me and kidnapped me and stole over $3 trillion just from bottom line New York. As they gave you Epstein, and then they murdered Epstein. And then get this. You remember Janet Barclay.
Yeah.
I married. Janet Barclay was my secretary and my girlfriend, and her name was Bauman, and they murdered her brother, who was my attorney when they murdered my wife. They murdered him on the same day.
Mm-hmm.
On his way to the district attorney to file my wife's murder charges in Tennessee. Well, Janet Bauman married Mr. Barclay as she dated me. She called me up one day and told me she was getting married. I thought she was proposing to me. She said, "No, I'm marrying Mr. Barclay." So she married into Barclay bags.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just unbelievable, my life. Barclay owned the airport where 2 guys murdered me, stole my car, and then took my car and stole an airplane. And that's why the police detective in Warren was supposed to be protecting me. He didn't protect me. He was screwing my new wife. And then you got
Mm-hmm.
Eminem. When I moved to Tennessee, the world got Eminem out of his house on 8 Mile. He lived in the trailer park Eminem lives in now. So
Yeah. Alan Akers did.
Eminem came from Alan Akers, the police detective who was screwing my wife instead of protecting my life. As I was a publisher at ASCAP New York, and my federal publishing license came from Foley Federal Court, and McVeigh and Nichols had lived next door to me for 30 years. When I moved out here to the West Coast, Nichols moved next door to me, married to the guy that shot John Lennon at the Dakota. As I lived with the Lakota Indians who own Mount Rushmore in Dakota. These things are not coincidence, Greg.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's no way.
And
There's
then
way too much here for this to be coincidence.
Rusty Hawthorne murdered my brother-in-law, Brian
Yeah.
Waldman,
Mm-hmm.
changed his
Yeah.
name, to Rusty Kill and told me he was going to kill me next. Came out and smeared the blood of cats on my house.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had Alec Baldwin handed a gun by Hall, who was one of my rapists.
Yep.
Daryl Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're charging Alec Baldwin, who was Hugh Liu, as I was arrested for Jimmy Hoffa's murder. Louise was Hoffa's guest at the Sly Fox as he disappeared, my mother-in-law, and I'm Hugh Liu. And my family gave the world the internet Hulu operates on. It's just unbelievable, my life. And then they all pretend I don't exist, and I'm not newsworthy. 4 murdered wives, dismembered and murdered wives, hung in their dog's leash, by police, kidnapped out of their CPS offices by police, driven across 5 state lines, and I'm not newsworthy.
Mm-hmm.
Any black person in the country gets a little hangnail from a policeman, it's instantly on the news, and it's Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Because I'm a
BLM, like bottom line. Yeah.
BLM, bottom line music, New York, Foley Federal Court. And after 9/11, they beheaded Foley. My whole life is marked like this, Greg, and I don't exist because of the CIA and the FBI that kidnapped me and murdered my identical twin. They beat him to death, chained next to me. With Camille Sirhan, 11 years before they framed Sirhan for Bobby's murder. And the Kennedy families came to all my performances. They came to my performances. Jackie Kennedy's, her brother came to my performances, every one of them. He ate dinner with me. He'd go out and have dinner with me.
Mr. Bove?
Yeah. I grew up with them.
Mm-hmm.
And she ran to unassist after her husband's murdered. And then they hide me behind UFOs at Area 4 and S4, Area 51 and S4. Well, I'm Squire 4, kidnapped, tortured, and they murdered my twin at 4. And my family built Area 51. You understanding this, Con? And
Oh, yeah.
it's all coming from the Senate and the White House, who stole my life.
I get it.
I really get it. And my family built America. There's no lie in this. And you know this is true.
Mm-hmm.
We authored the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, made the entire country, built the first Capitol. And I don't exist as all of you steal my life and murder my family 5 times. My entire family has been murdered 5 times since I was born. And then you tell me I'm the home of the free? There's nothing free in this country. There's nothing in this country who's free. And you're all going to get the same as you gave to me, all of you. None of you prosecuted a single killer of my family members. You're all going to get what you gave. It's called karma. Mm-hmm. You give bad to people, you get bad in return. So my whole family's been murdered 5 times by the U.S. government, and I'm on all your money. What do you think you're going to get, Greg?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe Putin might have something to do with that here soon. We'll see.
Joe Biden got 1.5 billion from China. Do you know how many Americans China has murdered in the last wars?
How many?
And then your president? I don't know. But you've had wars with Japan, Korea, Vietnam. These are all Chinese people, Greg. You had a lot of people murdered in all these wars by Chinese people.
Yeah,
and Joe Biden goes and he gets $1.5 billion in drug money. Mm-hmm. You know as well as I do, his son is a drug addict. Just like Lisa Marie Presley and Elvis Presley died of drugs.
It's not real hard to see that he's covering a drug trade.
And then a guy like me stops the drugs coming up out of Mexico as they sell illegal Gatling guns to cartels to kill Americans with. They get drugs in return. And the senators and the CIA are behind the illegal trade, pocketing the money they get for the illegal guns. And then you get Joe Biden gets 1.5 billion from the Chinese, who you're always at war with. Mm-hmm. Drug money, just like the Queen did in Hong Kong. Married to an SS agent out of World War II, Hitler's army.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that family's in the White House. And then you got Elon Musk, His family took over to cover a cover girl as they murdered Karen, whose sister was on cover girl, Maybelline.
Mm-hmm.
He's from South Africa. Oh, where all the
Yeah.
Germans went after World War II.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh, interesting. And he
That's
destroyed your
pretty
car
amazing.
companies, and he's giving you an electric car he didn't design or build.
Mm-hmm.
And now he runs your freedom on Twitter. A German man from South Africa whose mother helped murder my wife on Christmas Day. Musk and
That's
Gardner knew
amazing.
each other. Musk and my family owned Maybelline.
Mm-hmm.
Harris Publishing owned worldwide magazines, 164 at least. Life, Look, Time.
Bill Gates' mother is Gardner, so it makes sense how it all goes together.
Yeah, I know. You're not telling me anything I don't know. And Willis and Gates were raised by Mrs. Strader. And there's AA again, Bill W., the biker who murdered my wives. I'm well aware of what's going on, Greg. Castro
Yeah.
was collecting information on all the drunks after World War II. That's who he was. And he was an American, just like bin Laden. Bin Laden
Mm-hmm.
was an American CIA agent.
Mm-hmm.
And then they steal my life and they blow up the receipts in the Pentagon in the Twin Towers to hide what they did to me at birth as they murdered Admiral Byrd. I know what's going on, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to end this here. I wanted to say that my Weeblo's den mother, she took me to Roseanne Barr's mother's house, and they took me down in the basement and showed me crocodiles and alligators in the basement in a dugout pool in the Barr family's basement. Mrs. Barr fed her husband to the alligators and crocodiles in her basement.
Wow, that's
Right
something.
after, right after I married Nancy Fredericks, and it was in all the newspapers. You think maybe she caught him screwing little kids out of Hoover School?
That would make a lot of sense there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And then they didn't.
Us?
You can't even find a news article about that true story.
No.
And then you get Bill Barr, the same family,
You're right.
gave you Epstein in Dalton School, Manhattan, where they stole my trademark, bottom line, and gave it to the entire attorney's bar. And there's that name, Barr, stealing my trademark and then murdering my family to hide the theft
Mm-hmm.
in the White House as Trump uses my stolen trademark, bottom line, on the White House lawn. And then his base thinks he's helping me. They're not helping me. They covered up the murders of all kinds of kids. They murdered 5 Duncan kids in one afternoon on the same day they murdered Kennedy. They were my neighbors.
Yep. That's why I bet Jack Ruby's stripper girlfriend Barr with 2 R's is probably
They
the
kidnapped
same
me and
Barr
my
family.
twin with Camille Sirhan in kindergarten. We
Yeah,
were 4 years old. And
I get it.
Trump is covering all this up with the Barr family, who stole my trademark and made it a book you passed the bar exam out of. Every judge in this country studied out of my stolen trademark to become an
Mm-hmm.
attorney and then become a Supreme Court justice. And they're replacing me with people like Kamala Harris, who's not my family. And I'm the real Harris family in the Smithsonian.
Wow.
And then
Bottom line Barr exam and Attorney General Barr. That's
And I
amazing.
like Al
Wow.
Sharpton. Al Sharpton goes to every criminal's funeral and tells me that they went to God and what a good person they are.
Right.
George Floyd, Nichols, yeah, they're great people. Why was the police chasing them to begin with, Mr. Sharpton?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to end this here, Greg.
All right.
Bye.
Well, good night. Bye.